I am Professor Aziz-ur-Rehman, and today I am going to talk about adrenal diseases. We have two small adrenal glands sitting on the top of kidneys, and these are very essential organs. Though structurally they are two different organs, but they function as one. And if you see the structure, it has got a capsule. Then we have adrenal cortex, which produces several hormones, and then inside we have adrenal medulla, which also produces hormones. Adrenal cortex produces mineralocorticoid, and the example is aldosterone. Aldosterone is extremely important to regulate our salt and water, and indirectly blood pressure also. It is not exactly under the control of pituitary, but it has got its own feedback mechanism and very important. Then we have glucocorticoid, and the main example is cortisol. Cortisol has effects similar to aldosterone, but it is under the control of pituitary gland. Its main function is, I think, regulation of immune system and the glucose metabolism and amino acid mechanism. Very essential. Excess of cortisol and deficiency of cortisol both cause serious diseases. Then we have androgens, and the main androgen coming from the adrenal cortex is dehydroepiandrosterone. And this is important particularly for women because in women this is the only source of androgen. And you may be surprised, but women also need androgen for the normal functioning of their sex functions. It is important for libido, and it is also important to maintain pubic and axillary hair. Then we have medulla, and medulla produces two hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline. These are vasoconstrictor hormones released under the stress situation, and they can prepare us for a fight or flight situation. Uh, Adrenal glands, basically the cortex minus the aldosterone, is under the control of pituitary gland. Now, pituitary gland itself is regulated by hypothalamus. Hypothalamus provides a connection between brain and endocrine system. You know, both are very important to regulate our body system. The hypothalamus produces a hormone or a substance called corticotropin releasing factor. This would stimulate pituitary gland, specific cell which produce ACTH. Now, ACTH, the adrenocorticotropin hormone. Now, this hormone stimulates adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. Now, once cortisol is produced and it has got a certain level in the body, then body does not need more cortisol. It has got inhibitory effect on the pituitary gland and also the hypothalamus. So no more ACTH and no more CRF. So no more production of cortisol. That way, cortisol is maintained in a very physiological range. It changes from various levels, but it stays within a certain range. Because when we are, for example, sitting watching a TV, we do not need much of cortisol. But if we are doing some stressful activity like preparing for the exam, we need more cortisol. So our pituitary and hypothalamus regulate the cortisol level to keep within the normal range. Uh, like many diseases in endocrine, there could be deficiency of that hormone, and that is referred to as hypo, or there could be excess of that hormone, that is called hyper. Hypos are caused when the organ is damaged by whatever disease process, and hyper is usually caused by adenoma, a small tumor arising from the endocrine gland, or some unphysiological stimulus. Now let's first examine hypos. Uh, in adrenal gland, hypo mean Addison disease. In various disease processes and mostly autoimmune destruction of adrenal gland, there may be deficiency of all hormones, the deficiency of cortisol, deficiency of aldosterone, and also the deficiency of catecholamine, but specifically the deficiency of glucocorticoid. This would result in a syndrome called Addison disease. And in subsequent slides, we will describe what exactly is Addison disease. But it is the disease which was first described in detail by a scientist named Addison. Then in adrenal cortex, there may be hyper. Now, hyper could be due to, for example, a tumor which specifically produces glucocorticoid. That would result in what is described as Cushing syndrome. And the Cushing syndrome is a group of disorder, any condition where there is excess of cortisone or some other glucocorticoid in the body. The syndrome that results from excess of these hormones is described as Cushing syndrome, again after the name of the scientist who first described it. Cushing syndrome may indicate an adenoma of the adrenal cortex or hyperplasia of adrenal cortex, or it may be due to iatrogenic. Many times steroids are prescribed or steroids are given by quack, and that may cause Cushing syndrome. And occasionally there may be a small tumor in the pituitary gland which produces too much ACTH, and that may also result in Cushing syndrome, and that specific condition is called actually Cushing disease. Then there may be a small tumor arising from the adrenal cortex which produces too much aldosterone. Now, aldosterone will increase our sodium and water contents, and it will also stimulate aldosterone. It will cause vasoconstriction and will result in hypertension. And this is in fact one of the causes of resistant hypertension. Then occasionally there may be adrenogenital hyperplasia, and this is a congenital deficiency of enzyme which actually is involved in production of cortisol. So there is deficiency of cortisol. Once cortisol is deficient, the inhibitory effect on the pituitary is lost. Pituitary produces too much ACTH as an attempt to normalize cortisol, and cortisol is normalized, but inadvertently these androgens are produced in excessive quantities. Now those androgens, if the child is a female, that androgen may cause masculinization. So this is another condition where there could be excess. Now talking about the adrenal medulla, and the hyper condition is actually referred to as pheochromocytoma. There may be a tumor which produces too much adrenaline and noradrenaline, and this is released into the circulation, usually episodically, and it usually causes episodic hypertension, sometimes sustained hypertension. It will be covered in greater detail in hypertension, but in endocrine also we mentioned about pheochromocytoma. So these conditions we will discuss in greater detail later. For now, thank you very much.